Hey there, this week on Golden Key Design, we're going to take this ceiling and turn it into this. Now let's head back in time to when we first bought the place.
So here's what the basement looked like over a year ago, and as you can see, we had an old spiral staircase that we had to remove, but the main thing I want you to take note of is that drop ceiling. It kind of looks like a corporate office, and we were actually losing about 12 inches of ceiling height because of how low it is. Now we could replace it with a drywall ceiling, but that's pretty labor intensive and expensive, so we decided to paint it black as we were already going for that industrial look anyway. The first step was taking down all the tiles, which you're probably going to want to wear a mask of some sort because there's lots of dust under those, and then we began taking out the metal structure. I recommend wearing gloves during this process. Do as I say, not as I do, because it can actually cut your hands pretty easily. It's pretty sharp, so just be careful. So this is what the basement looked like after we had taken down the majority of the drop ceiling, and it actually stayed like this for a couple months while I finished renovating the upstairs, but now it's finally time to get back to it.
Before we can get to painting, there are a couple steps in preparation that we need to do. First is cleaning up all this junk, as this has basically been a storage area for us while we renovated the upstairs. Now we're finally moving into the basement and we gotta clean all this up. In order to secure the drop ceiling to these joists, the installers use these U-clips that are pretty large gauge metal, and I could probably leave them in, but I prefer to take them out, so I'm just going to use a screwdriver and kind of pry my way into it and just leverage off the joist and pull them out. There are probably maybe 100 in here, and it's going to take some time, but I think it's going to be worth it in the end. Next up, we're going to be removing this metal trim, and it goes around the entire perimeter of the room, and this is what supported the drop ceiling. They're installed with pretty thick nails, but I should be able to pull them off with a pry bar. However, I have to be careful not to damage the wood already on the walls. Alright, so now we're finally ready to start taping. I'm going to start here on probably one of the easier walls because each wall is going to be a bit different and a little bit of a challenge. But this one's relatively easy as it's straight across. As you can see, I have my laser set up. I just used some of my PS5 games to stack it to the correct height. And now I have a nice line that I can use as a reference point as I put my tape on the wall. But first, I'm going to take a rag and just wipe down the wall to make sure it's nice and clean. That way the tape sticks nicely. The other thing I have to watch out for is because this is a tongue and groove wall, there's a lot of these like divots in between each board, or the seams basically. And if I just went straight across with a piece of tape and then sprayed, the black paint would probably get into those seams and, you know, create like a little triangle downward. And so in order to prevent that, I'm going to have to basically crease my tape down into each of those seams. And it's going to be a bit of a challenge and take a little bit more time, but it'll be worth it in the end. Alright, so we had some HVAC work done a long time ago, and they cut out some of the cedar here to access some of the parts behind the wall, and now we're finally spraying it, so we're going to cover it up. I cut a piece to size, luckily we had some left over. Let's go ahead and nail it. Alright, so we've made it about halfway around the entire basement maybe, and so far it's going pretty well, but now we've hit this HVAC vent, and we thought about maybe not spraying it and leaving it this metallic metal would be kind of cool. However, this is the wall that the TV will end up going on, and I think it'll be a little bit distracting, so we ended up deciding just to spray it all black. And so over here, I'm just going to tape around the vent, and then up here there's some empty space behind it, so I'm probably going to tape maybe 3 or 4 inches above the vent, and that way you'll just see the cedar, and you won't really see any of the sprayed black. Alright, so now we are all done taping that line that goes all the way around the entire room, but now I need to cover up the walls with some plastic. You can do this manually, however I did buy this specific 3M product that should make it a little bit easier. Let's go ahead and put it together. There we go. Let's get to taping. Alright, so now that it's up, we can just pull it down, and it's over 8 feet long.
This product worked perfect for this application and saved me a ton of time. If you want to buy one yourself, I'll make sure to link it down in the description along with all the other products I used.
Alright, now before we start spraying the ceiling, I need to make sure that I tape off all of our lights because I'm going to leave those in place. So I took all of them out, and now I've gone through, as you can see, I've done a lot of them here and taped out just the light part so that the ring around the light gets sprayed black. So let's go ahead and do that. Then once that's all smoothed out, I'll take my fingernail and run it basically in between the light emitting surface and the ring around the side to basically give me a circle. So it might be a little bit hard to see, but there's basically an indentation now perfectly around where I need to cut. Then I have a really sharp X-Acto blade, and I'm just going to follow that line as closely as I can and go around the entire circle. Alright, it took a little bit of patience and some precision, but I just went around the entire circle with my X-Acto knife, and now I can pull off the excess tape. And there we go, now we have a perfectly taped circle. We just have one more left.
Once I finished taping out all the lights, I made sure to use a shop vac and vacuum the entire ceiling to make sure there wasn't any excess dust before I sprayed.
Alright, so I just reinstalled all of the lights that are now taped off. I went around and made sure that all of the tape connections were nice and secure, and even in some spots I went over with a second piece of tape just to make sure it wasn't going to fall. And I also went around the stairs and added more of this plastic to make sure that this is protected. Now that that's all done, I think we can start pulling down the rest of the plastic and get to painting. Let's get to it.
What's really nice about this plastic is that as you start to pull it down, it kind of self-adheres itself to the wall because of the static. Now I'm going to be replacing the carpet in this room, so I wasn't concerned about getting paint on any of that. However, if you are keeping your foil, you're going to want to make sure that you put some tarps down on the floor as well. And you may have noticed that I'm not using the standard Scotch blue tape, but instead a green tape. It's actually called frog tape and is, I think, a lot higher quality. It does cost a little bit more, but it's definitely worth it.
Alright, so now that we're almost ready to spray, here's the sprayer that I picked up. It's the Magnum X5 by Graco. Graco is a very common brand, as well as Wagner, but I found that this was the best bang for your buck. There are some higher end models and there are some lower end models, but I think this one will be perfect for this application. It's already pre-assembled in the box, so we should be able to open it up and get started pretty quickly. Let's get to it. There we go. Alright, let's get changed.
Let us spray.
So now we're going to be straining the material. This is to get out any large chunks of material so that it doesn't clog the sprayer. So what I have here is a paint strainer, and we're basically going to pour the 5-gallon bucket into this bucket, and it'll strain the paint, and then we'll pull this strainer out, and then we can get into spraying. Hopefully it doesn't spill anywhere, but we're going to replace the carpet anyway.
So this paint is from Sherwin-Williams and is called Dry Fall, and that's because it actually dries in the air before it hits the ground, so it's easy to sweep up, and is commonly used in big manufacturing facilities, but it's also used for basement ceilings like this.
Wait, I need to put on my mask.
Alright, hopefully you can hear me. We just did the whole startup procedure and we're ready to spray, but we might need to adjust the pressure. We're going to see how it goes. I got everything ready, I think, so we're going to start on this back wall that probably won't be seen just in case we screw up.
So as you saw, I actually had some drips in the very beginning, and that's because you actually flush the paint sprayer with water first before spraying paint. So learn from my mistakes and spray the wall maybe a little bit before you start actually spraying the ceiling, and make sure all the water's out of the system. This is actually my first time using a paint sprayer, and this is a great project to start with because it's pretty forgiving. I didn't focus on it too much in this video, but the key is that your ceiling is dust free before you start spraying. If there is dust, it's going to be sprayed and it's going to go everywhere and just ruin your finish. So please make sure that you vacuum your ceiling and dust it prior to this process. Also, you want to make sure that you're trying to spray everything from a variety of angles because there's a lot of nooks and crannies in the ceiling and it's hard to get everything. During my research for this project, I learned that some people primed and some people didn't. I decided not to prime and I just used one coat of the paint and had no issues. I was also able to spray the metal vent without any problems either, and I covered the entire basement with just one 5-gallon bucket. Now, as I mentioned before, this is dry fall paint, which means it dries before it lands, and that way you can actually vacuum it up or sweep it up. However, I still recommend putting down some floor coverings if you do plan on keeping your floor because it still is quite a mess.
Alright, so as you can see, we just finished the ceiling. It's still kind of drying, but I think now is a good time to pull off the tape because if it dries too much, you might flake it away as you pull it off. So we're going to go ahead and start taking down this plastic, and I'm hoping and praying that the tape held up nicely and that everything, all the planning was worth it, and hopefully we don't have any overspray in areas we don't want it. Let's get to it.
pulling off the tape on all the lights, we were officially done. But now let's take a look back at what the basement used to look like. It was quite a mess, and the ceiling definitely wasn't helping. It also felt a bit claustrophobic as there was already a ton of wood on the walls, and then with all of the wood on the ceiling too, it just was too much on the eyes. And after all the hard work, here's what it looks like today. I'm really proud of how the project turned out, especially with this being the first time I've ever used a paint sprayer. All that prep work was totally worth it. If you enjoyed the video or found it helpful, I'd really appreciate it if you could smash that like button, as it really helps out the channel. And this is actually the first project of many in this basement renovation series, so if you want to see more of it, get subscribed and stay tuned, as next week we're going to start building the bar. And I wanted to show the detail behind this vent here. I'm really glad that I sprayed up above the vent so you don't even really notice where I sprayed behind it. Instead, you just see the vent and then the wall. Also, you may notice a faint line going around the perimeter of the room just beneath where I sprayed. It's actually not oversprayed, but where the drop ceiling used to be, and you can kind of see where the wood got sun faded. And this here is probably the only mistake that I made throughout the whole process. This is where that water was getting sprayed out of the gun early on, but it'll all be covered up by that basement bar I was talking about earlier. And here you can see just how well that frog tape worked. I'll link it down in the description. And as always, thanks for watching and happy building. See you next week.